Castlevania is one of the most iconic video game franchises to ever exist. It was not only one of the most iconic games back when video games were still in their infancy, but it has gone on to redefine and create genres of games that are still thriving today. It's unfortunate that while this franchise still had so much potential left within it, it was owned by Konami. If you don't know, Konami became allergic to using their IPs in smart ways, and instead decided to ruin their legacies with their recent releases. Major franchises like Contra and Metal Gear were tainted thanks to Konami's efforts to remove what actually made those games so iconic in the first place. And Castlevania was no exception either. Castlevania slot machines, Castlevania NFTs, Castlevania mobile games, Castlevania pachinko with erotic violence. I can go on with other examples, but I think you get the idea. Konami mismanaged their IPs heavily, and it only got worse as they tried to move away from making video games. That's not to say good things haven't happened for the franchise, though. Simon and Richter got into Smash, and you can just tell how much passion went into this based on all the spirits and music they put into the game. That Castlevania mobile game actually released several years after it was supposed to, even if it is only on Apple Arcade. And pretty soon, we'll be getting a Castlevania Dead Cells DLC, which looks pretty damn good. It's not all doom and gloom for the franchise, but the fact that we're probably not getting another quality Castlevania game for the foreseeable future is pretty saddening. And when you lose something that you didn't appreciate enough while it was around, it makes you reminisce about what you lost. I still have some Castlevania games I've been meaning to play, and while they might not compare to the peak of the franchise, they still are notable entries in the franchise. And among those was Castlevania Judgement, a game that I've owned for a long time, but just never understood it. I never really cared for fighting games as a kid. Maybe part of that was because they were too complex for me to understand, or maybe it was just I was too dumb to comprehend them. Regardless, I'd always spend my time playing games like Mario or the mainline Castlevania games because I just enjoyed them a lot more. But when I saw this game on my shelf, I just knew I had to go back to it. I had always wanted to beat it, but I just never really felt like doing it or didn't care to set up my Wii again, so this was my chance, and I took that chance. I booted up the game despite my Wii sounding like it was on its deathbed, and I was ready to play some Castlevania Judgement. Before I talk about anything, I'll just mention that this game doesn't look this bad. I use an HDMI upscaler to play and record Wii games, so this is just how it looks through this HDMI upscaler. In comparison, here's the game running in Dolphin at native resolution. It looks a lot better, and the upscaling just makes it look even better. I debated playing this game in Dolphin since I could just hook my GameCube adapter up and use my GameCube controller, but I wanted that authentic experience. I wanted to beat my copy of the game on my Wii, and I was going to do that even if it meant the game didn't look great. With that out of the way, let's start talking about the actual game. And we might as well start with a brief description of this game. This game is very different from other Castlevania games because while the mainline games are typically action-focused, this game is a fighting game. And on top of that, it's a 3D fighting game. I never really played 3D fighting games before, apart from the Naruto Clash of Ninja games on the GameCube, so to say that I'm out of my element here is a little bit of an understatement. The game itself isn't too complicated though. You have your basic fighting game moves and combos, a guard, a jump, and a hyper move. It's all pretty simple, but the harder part is actually stringing together these combos to play the game competently. I'd like to say I was able to successfully do that, but if I can be honest, I did not do that. I found that you can beat a majority of the single player content just by mashing one or two combos repeatedly while occasionally guarding and maybe using a hyper move sometimes. There were a few points where I couldn't just turn off my brain and spam B, but we'll get there when we get there. The story of this game is not as in-depth as I originally thought it would be. To sum up this game's plot, 14 characters are stuck in a time loop where they can find what they desire by completing a series of trials, which are basically just fighting other characters in the time loop. Each character has their own unique story, but the stories can be pretty hit or miss. Some story arcs are just about testing their strength to see if they can defeat Dracula. Some are about exacting revenge on another character for something in the past. And then there are others that are more unique. For example, Grant's story focuses on how he wants to marry Sypha and even gets to fight Trevor to see who was more worthy of Sypha. It was an interesting story that I honestly had never known about and probably would have never known about if not for this game. Dracula's story was also pretty interesting since it consists of him fighting all of those who have fought against him previously. Sometimes the characters just have generic dialogue before a fight, so seeing Dracula recognize almost every opponent he fights and reminisce about their past battles was pretty cool to see. But for every story like these, you have some that feel a bit out of place. I found Maria's story to be the worst of them because her story is about wanting bigger boobs, I guess? She fights Sypha and the majority of the dialogue is spent talking about Sypha's boobs, and it's similar with Carmilla. The story just felt so weird and out of place, but fortunately there weren't too many stories that were this bad. But we haven't talked about my favorite story in this game, which is probably the character that you would never expect. Golem. Yeah, we have all these iconic characters, and then there's just a random golem they put in here. But this story actually focused on telling a story instead of just a character getting revenge or testing their strength. Golem's story focuses on what it means to live and wanting to be human now that there's a time rift that has given him sentience. And I found it to be more interesting than getting some bits of lore about a character. It's just a shame that Golem as a fighting game character is not the best, but we'll talk about that soon. Of course, since this is a fighting game, what matters here most is the gameplay. And while I do have some critiques, I have to say that I do enjoy the gameplay. There definitely is more depth than what you'll see in most of these clips because, as I mentioned, I pretty much just mash the same combos to win most of the time. There are other moves, but I was just too dumb to use them and try to learn some actual combos, so this is most of what you're gonna see. This game feels pretty good to play, but there are times where I just feel like I struggle to do anything. Sometimes it was the fault of the camera because it can be a bit frustrating to deal with on some stages, or even when Dracula is on the screen because he just blocks the whole goddamn screen, but I also feel the game balance wasn't perfect here. I found characters like Maria, Eric, and Shinoa to just be really strong. They have really good and fast combos with long range, so it's hard to punish them for just mashing B on you. On the other hand, you also have Dracula, who is really strong thanks to how defensive he can play. It feels so difficult to ever punish him for using a move or even just avoiding his attacks given how generous the hitboxes can be at times. But my biggest issue with the gameplay actually doesn't lie within character balance, but within the stages. I like stages that are diverse and interesting in fighting games since they can completely change a matchup and make a match feel more unique. However, a lot of the stages in this game just feel really bad to play on. For example, you have this cemetery stage where zombies can spawn. For some reason, they only seem to focus you, which makes these fights feel like you're fighting a 3v1. You can kill them, but they just respawn, and killing them often means you're left vulnerable to actual enemy attacks. Some of these stages also have pretty bad camera angles or jarring camera changes, such as the ship stage and the throne room stage. My least favorite stage ended up being the clock tower, which is insane because I usually love the clock tower areas in Castlevania games. However, this stage is just terrible to play on. There are gears that can be destroyed, causing them to fall and sometimes resulting in pretty cheesy wins. But the worst part of this level is the fact that it is completely open. Ring outs aren't insanely common in this game, but on the other stages, they sometimes happen in the right scenario. On this stage though, the vast majority of my fights ended with someone just getting cheesed with the ring out, and it just feels so bad. You can be kicking someone's ass on this stage, and suddenly you're just dead. I hated playing on this stage, and unfortunately, there is a part of every story mode where you have to play on this stage. You can retry in story mode infinitely, but it just feels so frustrating to lose again and again because I just get knocked off the stage by one stray hit. While I have talked about the general gameplay, I also want to talk about all of the modes in this game. Just like other fighting games, you have an arcade mode, which is fine. I didn't really try this until I finished the other modes, but it was still a decent time and you get some rewards for winning, so I guess it makes it feel a bit more fresh. I was also able to destroy Dracula in this mode thanks to how much time I spent fighting him in the other modes, so just that fact alone made my arcade experience feel a lot better. There's also castle mode, which is honestly really cool. You have to go through Dracula's castle with each room being a new challenge. You can also get ambushed by enemies while moving between rooms you've already cleared, which can be a bit annoying, but it was never actually difficult for me. After going through the entirety of Dracula's castle, you have to fight Dracula in the final room. This fight is easily the hardest I had to endure in the entire game. Dracula is the most defensive, campy character in this game, so giving him health regen when he's just going to sit there blocking all your attacks was not fun. I thought maybe I could just stall him out and bring his health below mine as time ran out, but you actually have to beat him. I can't tell you how long I spent struggling on this boss fight, and it just felt so hopeless with every new attempt. If I got hit by one thing, I lost so much health. I was honestly unsure if I would ever be able to beat him, but then I started an attempt and literally managed to perfect him somehow. So I guess I just got good or something. Still though, this fight was so damn hard, and I have no clue why they gave him health regen when he just stalls you out for half the match anyways. Other than that, there's a gallery feature, but I was not playing through castle mode 13 or more times just to get images of the characters. There's also a character customization feature, but I never really messed with it a lot because I spent most of my time playing the story mode, where you don't get many rewards for winning. It is a nice little feature though, so I can appreciate that. And other than that, there's Versus, which is just a normal 1v1 against the CPU or second player. There's Wi-Fi battles, which don't exist anymore. And you can also connect your DS with Order of Ecclesia to unlock Shinoa and some accessories, as well as some stuff in Order of Ecclesia. Funnily enough, this is how I unlocked a bunch of stuff in my copy of Order of Ecclesia as a kid, since I was never good enough to beat the game back then to increase the level cap. And yeah, that's pretty much it with the other modes. There is a bit more than I expected here thanks to Castle mode, but there isn't an insane amount of single player content given that this is a fighting game at heart. And this is where we enter spoiler territory. If you really want to play this game blind, then that's fair, but I really don't think you'll be missing out on much by getting spoiled, and this game's story mode is a bit annoying, so I wouldn't recommend playing this game solely for the story. Skip to this timestamp if you really want to avoid these spoilers, and here we go. After 10 fights, each character finds what they desire and is now satisfied. Then, Aeon accepts a soul key, and this will usually allow for a new character to be selected in story mode. I didn't record any of this because I played through this portion before wanting to make a video, so I'll just have to describe it from here. After completing every story except for Aeon's, the true enemy is revealed. I thought that this was going to be Aeon or something, and I was going to have to play through his story as the villain or something, but I was soon proven wrong when the game told me to play through true story mode. What is true story mode exactly? It's playing through the same story mode again with some extras at the end to actually complete the character's story. When I found out that I essentially had to do everything I just did all over again, I ended up putting the game down for a while. This had completely demotivated me from playing the game, and I would think it would demotivate most people from wanting to finish this game. I just played through all of this, and now you want me to play through the exact same fights again just for some extra bits at the end? Seriously? Imagine if you just played through Mario 64 and you're about to fight Bowser, and then it tells you to go collect all the stars all over again. Yeah, that's really frustrating for a player to deal with. But eventually, I came back, determined to beat this game once and for all. I had to relearn the game again to an extent, but quickly got better with the combos and mechanics. I got to the new part of each story where you basically fight Aeon to see who is more worthy of fighting the new threat, and then fighting that threat. This new threat is called the Time Reaper, who is basically trying to destroy time or something like that. The Aeon fight is particularly frustrating thanks to being on the clock tower stage I mentioned earlier, but eventually I got better at just cheesing him and was able to make my way to the final boss, the Time Reaper. This fight is not that bad honestly, but it is pretty punishing until you learn his combos. I had to learn my best damaging combos to deal damage to him, and learn his moves so I could dodge them. He has a slash that he does rarely, but it's pretty easy to avoid it with a roll. He also does this move where he summons these black spheres, which can be a bit random, but are generally avoided by staying in this spot. After this, he will always do his Beg for Mercy attack, where he sends homing skulls at you, followed by his Ashes to Ashes attack, where he hits you with these pillars. And after this, you can easily hit him without getting punished. When you get his health low enough, he'll push you back and summon this massive beam that slowly moves, which will absolutely destroy you if you get caught by it. You can just roll through it, but this is character dependent and can feel really bad with certain characters. It's not just the beam though, because this fight was definitely not balanced for certain characters at all. Most notably, Golem and Dracula struggle in this fight hard. They can do a lot of damage, but they are incredibly slow, so dodging his attacks is pretty much impossible. I did manage to beat this without much issue using Dracula, but I would just say that it was due to me just getting better at the fight and a bit of luck with his moves. If Dracula was the first character I went to this boss with, it would have taken me hours upon hours to beat him. Golem is worse though, since he doesn't have the damage output that Dracula can get in optimal spots, and his roll is pretty bad for this fight compared to almost everyone else. I struggled so hard with Golem, but somehow I just managed to win by just brute forcing my attacks instead of focusing on dodging. After completing the true story modes with all 13 characters, I finally got to play Aeon's story mode. There was an annoying Dracula fight that took a while to beat, but after defeating the Time Reaper, I had finished the story mode once and for all. There isn't really much of an ending, to be honest. Most characters just go on to live their lives as they did in their original games. The only endings of note are Aeon's, which isn't even really noteworthy considering it just talks about how he protects time or whatever, and Golem's. Golem eventually realizes that if he can't become human and humans are afraid of him, he wants to protect humanity because that's what a human would do. Which is why we fight the Time Reaper despite the fact that leaving the Time Rift would cause him to no longer be sentient. The final ending doesn't really feel all that satisfying, but at least some characters got a bit of closure in the end. And that's Castlevania Judgement. I can't really say this was my favorite Castlevania game, but I can't say it was my least favorite, especially given that Castlevania the Adventure exists. Seriously, why is this game so bad? If you're looking for a Castlevania game to play, I can't really recommend this one all that much. It didn't really feel like much of a Castlevania game, but it is still a decent fighting game. If you are looking for a different fighting game to play with friends or something, then I think this could definitely work for that. I wouldn't think it's a fighting game on the same level of Street Fighter, Tekken, or King of Fighters, but I don't think it's a terrible one either. Personally, while I did have my critiques and frustrations with this game, I did really enjoy some of the highlights of this game. The interesting dialogue, the unique character designs, and those moments where all the frustration and difficulty was worth it in the end. Castlevania Judgement was a game that was always forgettable to me apart from its character designs, but after this playthrough, it'll always be a Castlevania game I remember. Well, that pretty much sums up my thoughts on Castlevania Judgement. I didn't intend to make this a video when I started playing this game, but as I played it, I felt compelled to do so. Especially given that this game is somewhat obscure and also gets a lot of hate in comparison to the well-known masterpieces and failures of the franchise. I have some other videos in the works currently, including a bigger project that has taken me a decent amount of time, and hopefully I'll have another video finished soon. Thanks for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.